Okay, members, it's my 7 o'clock. Pips have just gone. If you can keep quiet, because I can't raise my voice as usual. As some of you know, it disappeared last week. So please don't expect me to start shouting. Just listen up. Okay, everyone. Welcome to the meeting of the Housing and Health Committee, 22nd of October. Before opening the meeting, if anyone in physical attendance has an electronic device, mute it or switch it off. Any remote participants, keep your camera and mic off. We're not expecting a fire drill, so if the fire bell goes, follow me out the door. Right. Item 2, apologies for absence. Kelly?
Thank you, Chair. Apologies from Councillor Kieran Golding, and his substitute is Councillor Tony Winklis. Councillor Angie Vowles, her substitute is Councillor Tim Gibson, and Councillor Lloyd Bowen, his substitute is Councillor Julian Speed. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Minutes of the last meeting held on 1st of August. Is it your Councillor Martin?
Councillor Hannah Perkin puts her apologies in late. She is going to try and dial in online if she can get a signal up in Harrogate.
So somebody keep an eye on that little thing up there for me. Thanks. Minutes of the meeting held on 1st of August, pages 147 to 153. Is it your wish that I sign these as a correct record? Agreed. Okay, thank you. Has anyone got any declarations of interest?
I don't know whether this is one or not, but I've been elected onto the Public Board of Governors in the hospital.
We'll record it, but I don't think so, because you're representing the people. Good. Okay, then. Item 5, Adult Social Care Commissioning Update. We have with us today Mel Anthony and Simon Mitchell from Adult Social Care Commissioning. They've got some slides to show us. Very pleased to welcome you with us. If you go through what you've got, we will take questions at the end because that saves me. Stick your hand up and I'll make a list of who wants to ask questions or make any comments. This came up because we had some concerns about the number of people with no criteria to reside currently in our main hospitals either end of the borough. So it was a case of Charlotte very kindly got our colleagues along to talk to us, and it's really, well, what is the situation? Is there anything we can do to help? Is there anything we can lobby to help? Why is this happening? Why isn't that happening? This is an information gathering exercise because it's not going to be sorted out overnight, but if there is anything at all that we can do through any of our sources, avenues or anything else, then we need the information in order to take it forward. So over to you, Mel and Simon. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Just by way of introduction, if it's not obvious, I'm Simon Mitchell and I'm the Assistant Director for Adult Social Care Commissioning within the Adults and Integrated Commissioning Division at Cambridge County Council. And this is my colleague.
And I'm Mel Anthony, I'm Commissioning Manager within the same division, so I work with Simon and take an interest in what happens in North and West Kent.
So the presentation today is just to give you a brief overview of You've disconnected.
How come?
I don't know. But sorry. So a few little tech issues. We're here to give an overview of the social care and commissioning and services available in the borough, with also sort of obviously a bit of a sort of strategic context in terms of the whole of Kent as well. Just while
to get that to share.
Trying to fill the gap. I suppose I've got no internet.
Yeah.
I'll see if I can.
Would you? Thank you so much. Yeah, we're not able to connect to your internet, unfortunately. So
Just go to
If you
the
could-
first,
the next slide, please. That's super. So in this slide, we thought it might be helpful to just show you what your local operational social work team looks like. Obviously, Simon and I belong to the commissioning division, so we're not qualified social workers, but this just shows you how we've rearranged our social work teams to be closer to the communities that they're working in. So you can see the names there of the assistant director for this area. That's Richard. He has an area operations manager, and that's Will. And then the area is divided into two teams, Sittingbourne and then Sheppey. We thought it might be helpful to give you the name of the community team manager there, and also an indication of how many people are working in that team. Alongside them, there is the Social Care Connect teams, which these two teams can draw on. And also there is a team of occupational therapists that work around the county. So those are the main individuals that are working in your area, but there are others that we can draw upon as well. Next slide, please. Thank you. So we thought we would outline for you what help and support there is in Swale for your residents. And one of the primary and new ways that we are putting people, all kinds of residents, in touch with things that they might find useful in their own communities is by this relatively new Connect to Support website. So it's packed full of information and advice, and it really helps people to just think about all sorts of things that they might need help with long before they might consider thinking about needing adult social care. In addition, people can use that website to self-assess for an adult social care intervention. So in your slide pack that we have already circulated, the link is there, so you can have a really good explore. You can go onto that site, have an explore. But we've put the tiles there in those different areas, and that might not be terribly clear on the screen. But there's lots of information and advice, information for carers as well, and helping people to understand how they can decide for themselves what support that they would like, and we call that self-directed support. And then there's also a community directory of services that are available within people's own areas. And the bottom tiles there just give an indication of the areas that might resonate with your residents when they're thinking about what sort of help they might need. Next slide, please. Thank you. So in addition to those kind of pre-adult social care services, we thought it might be helpful to just set out what kind of commissioned services there are in your area as well. And some of them are more traditional and some of them are relatively new. And as commissioners, we're always looking for new ways to provide support for people that they can choose for themselves what care and support they might like. So in your area, there are 42 care homes with around 1,000, just under 1,000 beds in your borough. There are also specialist housing services. So these are things, these are schemes where somebody will have their own tenancy, but there's support that goes alongside that. And the extra care scheme at Regis Gate by Southern Housing is an example of that kind of service, 51 units there. Care and support in the home, also known as home care, where people will go in and provide support. We have 6 providers of care and support in the home in this area. and they're delivering in 2 clusters. We also have an additional provider who is working inside the prison estate, because obviously that population is ageing as well, and there are care and support needs that are emerging within that estate. So we have a specialist provider with all of the relevant regulatory permissions to be able to perform those duties inside the prison estate. So altogether, just to give you a picture of what the activity level is like in care and support in the home, so we've provided something in the order of over 3,000 hours in Sheppey up until September of this year. So there's a large amount of support that's going on, and you know, there's a lot of activity. Some of the newer things, the newer contracts that we've commissioned, we have a new community equipment service. So this is around making sure people have got equipment so they can stay home longer and live successfully at home. So that might be, you know, hoists, or it might be lifts for chairs, all sorts of things that just help people to stay at home within their own homes, with their own families, and live successfully there. We also have a new contract around using technology, and some really interesting innovation there around how we can use technology to support people with reminders for medication, for example, monitors for sensors and detectors and alarms, that kind of thing, that help people once again not need to go into more restrictive settings like a care home, but enable people to live more successfully at home. We have a carer support service that's provided in this area by Imago and Crossroads, and then the hospital discharge service. We've been working alongside our colleagues in the ICB to make changes to that service and to bring it in-house, having previously been externally commissioned. And that will then become a joint brokerage model between us both to make sure that the right support is in place to enable people to be discharged from hospital and live at home, and receive that support at home. And one of the newest services, particularly close to my heart because I look after this one, is community micro-enterprises. So this is a new way of thinking about the interventions that people might need, again, to live the kind of lives that they want to, by going into really, really very, very local communities and having those hyper-local conversations with people who live in those neighbourhoods, and finding out if they would like to become a support provider to a very small number of people. And I'm sure amongst us, we all know of individuals in our neighbourhoods that would quite happily, you know, make a dinner for somebody or take them to an event, you know, once a week, maybe go to a club or something like that. Currently, they might do those things voluntarily. This is a way of making sure that there is an accreditation process, that those people that are doing those activities for vulnerable people in your borough are fit and proper people. They have all the relevant insurances, but equally they're not saddled with having to join a big organisation. They can just run a very, very small micro business of their own, helping people out in their local community. Thank you.
So the overarching strategy for adult social care, if you're not aware, is called Making a Difference Every Day. That is our overall direction of sort of where we want to, as part of not only the operational, the practitioner and social work side, as well as commission side and our in-house delivery moving. And so that's around making sure that people, there's another phrase you'll start to hear coming through at the moment called glorious ordinary lives. So it's about ensuring that people are able to sort of live the lives the way they want to, and the support is built around that, moving away from some of those more traditional types of support and thinking about how people want to live their lives. Again, the link is there. When you hopefully get sent this through, there's a link through so you can read through the strategy if you haven't seen it already. But it, basically it will just describe what we've talked about and our move to make sure sort of the support is geared around an individual and how they can be in control and live the lives they want to.
We worked with the people of Kent to co-produce that strategy. We had a range of drop-ins and working groups, and we used all sorts of community groups to help us devise that strategy and to come up with those kind of themes. Now, what we're doing now is we're reviewing that. So we did that in 2022.
Yeah.
It's the 2022 to 27 strategy. So we're reviewing that, and we're going back out and talking to community groups, just sense check. These are the things that we've done in light of what you told us. Are they still the right things? Are they still the things that are important to you? And what we found is that those themes are consistent, and then that's informed the things that we might want to do in future and really focus on. So using the strategy, the things that we've achieved in the time between 2022 and now are really around driving that person-centred practice and making sure that people have the opportunity to use direct payments. So instead of the county council deciding, this is the home care package that you're going to have, this is the care home that you're going to have, the person gets to have that money themselves and think, well, actually, I'd quite like my next door neighbour to be the support person for me, and really choose and shape that care package for themselves rather than have it done for or to them. I've spoken already about the TELS contract, the Tech Enabled Lives contract. That again came out of understanding and listening to people who live in Kent saying, I want to be able to live longer at home. I don't want to go into a care home or a care setting. I want to live longer at home. And I've already described your community team. So again, bringing our teams, our operational teams closer to the communities that they're working in. And we've been, exploring all of those themes to make sure that we remain true to the principles of the things that people told us in the strategy. So what we're doing now is we are working towards this kind of overarching vision that's in the slides there. Again, keeping co-production as a really important thread in what we're doing, and making sure that the decisions that we make and the things that we do are centred around the people who will be using those services and need care and support in Kent. And working in an integrated way with others, not always easy, often challenging, as things change around us. But certainly that's something that we're committed to. And the Hilton discharge pathway is a really good example of how we're working closely with the ICB to think differently about the way that we devise services. Using technology, using data to inform what we do next. And focusing on well-being rather than on services. What does a good life look like to people in Kent, rather than focusing on what does that contract look like. Next slide, please. Thank you.
So one of the strategies that we're just in a process of also refreshing is the Kent Adult Social Care Accommodation Strategy. So this was previously written and updated pre-COVID, and obviously COVID had a significant impact on the social care sector, and we were planning to obviously refresh it a little bit earlier, but the reality is that the market has taken longer to sort of come back to and bounce back to sort of where it was, and so we've taken the opportunity at this point to start that refresh and look at where we are. The strategy as it stands has got 6 priorities. I'm afraid obviously the writing there is a little small. The first priority is basically the name of the strategy. It's the right home in the right place with the right support. So that is about ensuring that people, as much as possible, we keep them in their own homes, as long as obviously that is the right place for them. And then things will change as and when the needs change. We're looking to increase housing with care schemes or specialist housing schemes. So whether that be an extra care type model or just accommodation with support, those are schemes that we're looking at increasing. Data tells us that dementia is something that will increase, and so obviously we're working with the market. We are looking to how we can increase that specialist dementia care for the future. And we're working with the market in terms of increasing the quality of care as well. So we've recently just brought in a new quality team into our commissioning team. And so we're just building a new quality framework to then work with our providers and our market to ensure that actually where a provider may well be struggling or may have some issues, we can work and support them and help them through that so that the standard of care is of a good quality. So as part of the refresh that we're doing at the moment, we're looking to see whether those priorities are still the priorities that we want for the future. We're obviously looking to work and engage with our district and borough colleagues and look and understand what's in all of the local plans so that we can align and make sure that we're all sort of working in the right way. We're also, as Mel has said on a number of times already, working with the ICB as well around that, because it's where can actually, as a health and social care system, how can we work more effectively across Kent. Next slide, please. Obviously, a lot of writing. So, to be honest, a lot of this we've covered already. The accommodation strategy will also be building on some of the things that Mel's been talking about in terms of the use of technology and how actually to ensure a home for somebody remains the best place for them. How can we actually build that technology in? Whether it be adapting someone's home so that it's there, or whether new homes that are built with that already in. So it's about how we look at lifetime homes for people. We're looking at how we can work with community services, so that's both our health partners but also the broader community sector, so whether that be not-for-profits, our voluntary sector, in terms of how that can also fit around and support an individual so that they're able to stay in their own home. And then obviously we're looking at how we can influence and shape the market in terms of new developments or redevelopments of current buildings. So again, when we're looking at dementia care, if we've got a residential home, we know that we don't need as much residential in the future, but what we do need is more specialists. Can we work with a provider and get those homes redeveloped so they're appropriate for that specialist care? Final slide, I think this is, please. So in terms of obviously developing that strategy, that's a piece of work we're doing at the moment. We will be coming out and wanting to talk to all of you again more around that in more specific detail in the future. But it's about getting that vision, that long-term vision around all of our accommodation, whether that be people's own homes or whether that be building-based accommodation such as residential homes, so that it's fit for the future and is able to support people when they need that care and support around them. Thank you very much. Any questions?
Okay, I've got one point which I will raise when everyone else is finished, but I do want to say, first of all, I'm sure we could all have gone on Kent County Council's website and looked at that and thought, oh yeah. For me, you've brought it to life. And for me, I'd probably have to crib a bit with the slides, but I could actually talk to my residents, say, oh no, they can do this now and they can do that now. So I really, really thank you for coming along and doing it because it's here. Now, I've got so far Alistair, Karen, Anne, Peter Mack and Ben. So if Alistair starts, I'll take the next lot of names.
Thank you. You mentioned Sittingbourne and Sheppey. Presumably all the same services apply for the Faversham end of the borough. There's no difference there. Is that,
That's
is that
right. It's just the way that we've named them. So yeah.
Do you mind if I've got one or two? So shall I run through mine and take my turn at the end?
We are very privileged. I mean that. if I didn't mean it, I would keep my mouth shut, just so as you know. I want us to get as much as we possibly can out of our 2 visitors this evening. I hope you do come back with that revisit, but please feel free, as long as you're happy. We're never here till midnight. I'll just.
No, we're really happy to ask. And if there are questions that we don't have the answers to right now, if there's detail, we will come back with that detail if we don't have it right away.
You mentioned about OTs, and I wonder where the sort of overlap was between the community trust OTs and the people who work for yourselves, the NHS Community Trust.
They do all work together, but often it's about the person and working with the individual rather than working in a system, a named system. I mean, I think our community teams do have really close alliances with our OTs and with the hospital OTs as well. And the pathway that we're building around being able to, the discharge pathway that we're building will improve those links and connections even more.
Which probably answers my next question. So I wasn't quite sure what joint brokerage meant when you mentioned about the discharge summary.
So at the moment, when somebody is coming out of hospital, and this is predominantly coming out of hospital going into a care home bed placement, the health can place and have a relationship with the market, and social care can make a placement and have a relationship with the market, and those relationships could be very different. So what we're trying to do is bring it together so we have one relationship with the market across health and social care, and there would be one team that would be doing the placements on behalf of both health and social care.
And you mentioned Crossroads. I was wondering what the sort of response times for Crossroads were when it came to sort of crisis intervention, trying to keep people out of hospital.
We would have to come back to you on that. Won't have that data to hand. So yeah, as part of the support that Crossroads has, they do have a crisis service, is predominantly supporting those around dementia, but they do broaden that out at times. But I can come back to you with a more detailed response to that.
The final one, I'll shut up. About the wheelchair accessibility of new developments, we certainly often hear when we're talking through the local plan about the impact that has on viability. Is that something that you sort of feed into in terms of your commentary on the local plan and even planning applications as well? Because it's something that is, it's one of those areas. I mean, it's been highlighted in the sort of local plan work about how if we have more houses that have the wheelchair accessibility, that's going to have an impact on viability and something else. And I'm just wondering whether you inputted to that process, and also say on individual planning applications, the proportion of viable homes, wheelchair accessible homes.
I'll start, and if you can
Okay.
jump in. So when planning applications come through, and if it's appropriate, then we will feed into them, and we will give our view in terms of a sort of appropriate use, room sizes, or the wheelchair accessibility type of feedback that we can. I think, the challenge does come when the reality of ensuring new builds take that on board reduces potentially the number of homes or flats or whatever that can be built, because obviously the larger specs. I think the challenge is just obviously trying to engage with those developers or the providers in terms of trying to meet our requirements while at the same time them being able to meet what their requirements are. So we can obviously put our view forwards. It's about whether that then gets taken on.
I suppose what I'd add is it's very similar to the challenge you have as a local housing authority with affordable housing, and it's a really, really similar challenge, isn't it? I suppose what I would say is the development of the accommodation strategy for us is a really important way of signalling to developers what it is that's needed in Kent. So it's something that we can all rely on and we can all use and we can point to and say, this is a well-researched document that shows you why and how this is necessary and where it's necessary. So that's why it's important that we work with you and with our colleagues in Kent Housing Group, for example, to make sure that the Kent and Medway housing strategy and our accommodation strategy for adult social care align. So that's the kind of the work that we're doing right now. But it is really useful for us to be able to say, look, here's the body of work that we've already done, developer, here's the evidence for you. And I suppose the other thing that I would say in terms of do we get involved in local plans and planning applications, so we work really closely with our colleagues in the growth, environment and transport teams. So although they're outside of adult social care, they work with us alongside us to make sure that adult social care is a consideration when they are putting forward and their priorities and liaising with you around local plans. So we kind of sync up before it gets to you, I suppose, is what I would say.
Thank you, Chairman, for you. So thank you, Simon and Mel, for coming into the Dragon's Den, so to speak. And the information you've given us tonight is amazing what's being done. So I've got a few comments and a couple of questions. So I will be very, very quick. No criteria to reside. I think we've all had experiences of residents who are, well, the old day they would have been called bed blockers, especially with wards at the edge of the borough, both ways, of people, for example, being in Medway Hospital. They come and talk to them to get them to get them out for discharge, and then once they find out it's a Swale Borough Council resident, it's sort of close shop and let somebody else deal with it. So I think communication links between us and the hospitals and needs to be improved. So we need to make sure that our residents are getting the best deal, but all residents are getting the best deal. I think it's quite an emotive subject when it comes to adult care. And I think we also need to realise it isn't just older residents' care. It's adults. It could be young people. It could be young adults. It could be anyone. Would be in need of social care. I'm encouraged that the individual packages that you're looking at, because let's face it, people are unique. It isn't one size fits all when it comes to care packages. And having gone through it myself with my late father, it's quite a scary thing when you're the only member of the family and you're having to deal with all this, with having to go to so many organisations. So if we can make that a smoother process, making sure we get the best care for our nearest and dearest, then it's a win-win. As I said, it's so I've got to put the glasses on there. I can't read my own writing. So as I said, so people are unique with their own individuality and needs. So it's a way of getting ownership, not just for the individual, but also the families, their communities as well. So the other thing I was going to say is, are we involving, you said about the looking at enterprise within the community, are we looking at the charities that are able to provide as well, and making sure we've got communication with them? And what sort of communication do you have with families when it comes to making those decisions that are probably one of the toughest, I know it was for me, the toughest decision you ever have to make? Thank you.
I'll start. I'll start with the last part and then go back, I think it's probably the easiest thing. So in terms of the conversations with the families, then that would be our frontline social work practitioners, and they would be having those conversations with the families. And then as and when that support is identified, then they would be moving through into our arranging support team, and again the conversations would continue at that point. So yeah, I'm aware that obviously for some families and some at certain points those conversations can be quite challenging, but that's what our social work practitioners are there to support people through. I'll let Mel deal with the micros and the charities. I'll just go back to your first point around the discharge. So I think probably about a year or so ago, probably a bit more than that actually, it's probably nearly 2 years ago, we started a review with our health colleagues around how all of the various different pathways out of a hospital that people can follow, and there were numerous, whether it be that they go back to their own home, whether they go somewhere else, or if they go into a care home or wherever, and there were various different ways that support could be provided, and so what we've been working with our health colleagues over the last year or so is trying to smooth that out and make that a much more easy to follow pathway now. So the joint brokerage is one of those things, but then what we've also done now is for people that are going back to their own home, it's a model that we've been working on in East Kent, and we're slowly bringing that out across the rest of the county, is what we call a home first model, so that realistically anybody coming out of hospital, ideally going back to their own home is the best place with whatever support is needed, and ideally that's an enablement approach. So we would be supporting them in order to build back up their abilities that they may well have been deconditioned or lost a little bit while they're in hospital, so that they're able to look after themselves and not reliant on other support. We now have a single pathway for that in terms of people following through, and that's where Mel mentioned about bringing the service in-house. So that is now a service delivered by Kent Enablement at Home, which is a Kent County Council provided service. So people following that pathway out into their own home would now be supported through that service, with a view that after a certain number of weeks they will hopefully be able to look after themselves, or potentially a small package of care may be required depending on obviously the needs of an individual. So that's what that's what we're doing. We're aware that obviously we have winter coming up. There's been some pressures because we've recently just made that change. So I think for Swale, that change into sort of the Kia pathway happened, I think, in September. And so there's been some pressures because of shifting around of members of staff. But we're through that now. So hopefully we've built that capacity up in that pathway, which should be able to see us through the winter period this year.
Shall I just circle back to the question about enterprises? And also, I know that our Director of Adult Social Care would not forgive us for not mentioning in those conversations that we have that our social workers have with people, that they're very much based on strengths rather than deficits, not based now on what can't you do and how can we make up for it, but what is it that you want to do, how can we help you to do the things and achieve the things that you want to do. So I just need to get that plug in there for our colleagues in social work. In terms of the enterprises and working with the charities, so we have community catalysts, as they're known currently, but again, this is a service we are going to bring in-house because we're so committed to this approach. These people are pounding the pavements. So they're not doing this work from an office, they're knocking on doors, they're meeting in cafes, they're finding out who are the prominent people in this community, and what do they know? How can we share it? How can people access those services? How do we understand it? Some of that information is making its way into the online tool that I showed you earlier, but some of it is helping to shape what services might look like at a very, very micro level, at a street level, really. So that's kind of how we're doing that. I hope that helps.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. A few months ago, a resident contacted me about his 94-year-old mother. She was in hospital. She'd had pneumonia. Don't know how much time she's got left, to be fair. She's mentally sharp, physically more frail. I think he contacted me on a Thursday and he was told on the ward, oh, she lives in Swale. Oh, if she lived in Medway, it wouldn't be an issue. She didn't come home till the following Tuesday. I understand you've taken things back in-house, but for this lady to gain her independence and not catch something else in hospital at her age, it is so important for there to be a quicker pathway back home. Thank you.
Mel, just to help, some of the postcodes of our people in Swale who are literally on the border, Hartlimp, Newington and Upchurch, the postcodes, you'd think they were Medway Council. So the staff automatically contact Medway Council as opposed to using their...
Obviously, I can't comment on an individual case, but I think what I'm taking back from that, and I think probably easier for, rather than me try and say something which may or may not be correct, I'd rather go back, find out how our teams link into the hospital, to be able to come back and say this is actually how the Kent teams link into the hospital, are part of those discharge discussions, and can ease and help people through that discharge process. So that's something I'll take away and come back.
And I think that there might be something for us to look at in terms of how well the Medway staff understands the new Kent and Medway discharge pathway that we're creating. So we'll have a look at that as well.
Yes, I'll introduce myself to start with. I'm one of the unwashed from the Isle of Sheppey. I like the idea of people being in their home if that's going to be sensible and safe. We know that in the past things haven't always been what they ought to be, and I think if you've got companies providing care, meals or whatever, that they need to be properly supervised. And as a business person looking outside, sadly I think in the past they haven't been. So that really is quite important that people know what's going on. The only thing is I can't really equate your policy of quality and local provision of services with the non-provision of any care home provision on Sheppey. Now it's 10 miles from the nearest population to anywhere, and further inland, if you're further up the island, it's 20 miles. This is one way, so it's 40 miles for anybody to go and visit somebody. So the fact that we've lost all our provision, which we've had in the past and was bought and paid for by the taxpayers of Sheppey, I actually think that's pretty appalling. And I don't think the members were perhaps, and there's nothing to do with you, and I don't criticise you, but maybe they weren't probably put in the proper picture. But it seems to me to be pretty appalling that there's no provision on Sheppey. Thank you.
We understand that the closure of Blackburn Lodge was a really emotive decision to have to make, and that's very difficult. We have been working with local providers, and there is now provision as a new care home that has opened. and we know that they've taken some residents at Ocean Heights. But we know that this is really difficult, and there's a long history behind what's happened recently at Blackburn Lodge. There was a discussion of that at the County Council Adult Social Care Committee in September, and I'll happily provide the link so that members here can see the conversation that happened, the debate that happened, and the papers that were written that led to that decision. To come to your first point, however, on quality, and again, personal passion of mine, because I have just taken delivery of 6 new members of staff that will form part of the quality team. And this is a new team that will support the market to improve quality in all settings, so not just in care homes, but across all settings. They've only just joined us, so you'll have to bear with us while we do all the training and induction, but we're really confident that this is a way of working within local communities, connecting care settings together and driving up quality in those locations.
If I may just come back on one particular thing, can you tell us how many beds there are being made available at Ocean Heights?
I believe it's 50.
Just over 50,
yeah,
I think.
But let me check the facts on that, because that's just my recollection. But I will absolutely come back on the number of beds that are available there.
For KCC funded care, I mean.
For all, they're not all KCC funded.
So that home, obviously being a brand new home, is not on the KCC care home contract at this point in time. Or those beds are available. It could be that the home decides to take more private clients than KCC funded clients. Those discussions will just need to happen as and when there are appropriate placements to make in that home.
Yeah, I did offer to go into the one that's been closed and do the necessary tests, but that was refused by the County Council. So, and I say that without any problem with regard to anything defamatory, but I was pretty disgusted, quite frankly. And as usual for Sheppey, we end up with pretty poor service, frankly, from what we used to have. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. It's very emotive. So, just to continue on that, because not having a touch wood anyone yet. If this wasn't a new place, if it was like it'd been on the books for some time, do you how do I put this? Do you block book? You know, like we sometimes say for the TA, we'll say, you know, we might need 30. But we can guarantee 25. Do you do that sort of thing? I don't know how it works.
We do have various ways and means of shall we say, making arrangements with providers. So the contract that we have does allow us for certain things to potentially go down and negotiate block contracts. Most, if the majority, I would say probably 90+% of all of our placements are individually sort of negotiated placements within homes.
Had you finished, Peter? Had you finished?
Yes, thank you very much indeed.
Thanks. Ben, you're next.
Thanks, Chair. Apologies for the number on here. Let's start with the clarifying question. Obviously, we know from an NHS point of view, Faversham is separate from Sittingbourne and Sheppey. We have the East Kent Trust. You guys end up at Medway for the sins. So just to confirm, Faversham is in the Sittingbourne area and not in the Canterbury area for the social care.
We'll go away and draw that map for you and send it back.
Lovely, thank you. In terms of the hospital discharges, I don't want to repeat too much, but there is invariably an issue if it is Medway Hospital, regardless of whether it's Swale or Maidstone that they're going back to. It invariably results in a 3 or 4 day delay in discharge. In addition, on hospital discharge, one thing that comes up quite regularly is You cannot be discharged until your heating is working. The housing association or private landlord cannot go in and do your gas safety check unless somebody is there. So you end up 2-3 months down the line waiting until you can get a social worker and a gas engineer in at the same time. That needs to be rectified. We need to make it so that we can just get somebody there with the key to let the gas engineer in to do the safety check, and then you've cleared a bed straight back in home. And it is a tricky one. I get that it's a tricky one because everyone's got a huge caseload, and an engineer can't be more specific than saying, I've got the time slot, but if the traffic's bad, the traffic's bad. We do get that. You spoke a lot about providers and the market. The market to me always means that somebody at the end of the day is making a profit. So that's not KCC's care homes anymore. That's not reinvestment. But there was no mention of registered providers or housing associations that could provide the 3 and 4 star sheltered accommodation or semi-sheltered accommodation, supported living, as it used to be, or warden assisted living, I think it was at one point. Is that something that's seen as being the general direction that we want to head in, and in partnership? Certainly when you look on the housing sector, if you get somebody who is discharged and has to go into care home and there is no realistic chance of them coming out and going back home, it is an absolute nightmare to terminate that tenancy. You can go through months of it, and most of the time the housing association will end up having to use notice to quit powers to vacate that premises and make it available for the next person, because there is a general unwillingness for the county to sign off and say tenancy termination on behalf of another. And I understand that could be because you're looking at it and going, well, we have to work based on the capability and in the interests of the individual, and if they ever are able to go back, we don't want to surrender their tenancy. But there will be a general idea at a relatively early point whether that's something that's likely to happen, and we need to clear that up, because that is backlogging the temporary accommodation system, it's backlogging the people on the housing register. It's meaning that works can't get done, and realistically, if it's an empty property for a significant period of time, that means more damage is getting done all the time. It's not being heated, not being ventilated. It's going to be more expensive to bring back into use. So we need to look at it holistically to deal with that element as well. When you mentioned about securing more adaptable properties, when doing that, are you taking into account that as much as they might be adaptable, they cannot be adapted during the warranty period? That's a further delay. So you can't use DFG grant funding on a property that's a year old, because that voids the warranty. So you're just not going to do that if you own multiple properties. Also, in terms of, it's a bugbear for me in particular, when you're doing, as a professional, or if you're doing self-referral for the OTs in order to get the equipment list for your disabled facilities grant application, the page on the website seems to move every month. It's not obvious. You have to search a different search term every other month to find it. And depending on which district you're in, I think a few months ago it was, if you're in Maidstone or Tunbridge and Malling, you can do an online self-assessment. If you're any other part of Kent, you need to make a phone call or get a professional referral. And it's a really tricky thing. And again, that's preventing people coming back into their homes because they can't have the works done that they need for it to be adapted for them. We need to make it as simple and as obvious as possible for people to find that, just so that we can get people moving on and get the system working as it should. Don't get me wrong, I fully appreciate the work that's done by the workers on the ground. It is a tough job, and speaking with quite a few of them on a fairly regular basis, there is a caseload, and there does need to be a closer partnership between all organisations, housing associations, police, similar to what we've got when it comes to doing the MAREC stuff for DV, or when it comes to the child safeguarding conferences. We just don't seem to have that when it comes to the general social care side, and I think that's something that we need to explore to make things work for the residents and their family.
I think, shall I go first?
Yeah.
I mean, I think we're hearing loud and clear that there's a problem with discharge in Medway. So I hope that the previous assurances that we've given you about the action that we'll take to just uncover why that's happening, and in particular why, if we've got a joint pathway, why is that not happening with one particular, that brokered kind of agreement? Why is that not happening with one particular hospital? So that's something that we can take away and go and have a look at. Just to assure you, yes, we absolutely do work with RPs around the development of supported and specialist housing. And in some cases, that's around, as Simon mentioned earlier, readapting those services, changing those services, because actually we understand how people's needs have changed, and we've got emerging demand in some areas and less of a demand in others. So yeah, absolutely, the conversation with RPs is critical. And again, I would say that's why the accommodation strategy is so important to us, because it's a strategy they can pick up and we can describe it and say, that's what we need, RP, that's what we want you to do. And again, making sure that fits hand in glove with the Kenton Medway housing strategy that we're part of, and we're working alongside with Charlotte and others. That's a really important, that we're all singing from the same kind of song sheet. In terms of the ending tenancies and so on, that's a conversation for us, I think, to have with practitioners, because that will be happening at a social work level, and it wouldn't be appropriate for us as commissioners to comment on that. But we can certainly, if there's a particular issue here in this borough, we can certainly have a conversation with our practitioner leads to understand what's happening from their point of view and come back on
Just
that.
to be clear, it's not just this borough. It covers this borough and our partners in Maidstone and Ashford from the other partnerships.
Okay, well, we'll commit to finding out a bit more about that and understanding more about that. In terms of the self-referral pathway, there's and that kind of approach around the person. So there's an approach called Making Every Adult Matter meme, which is, it's been looking around for ages, and again, this is something that we think that we will achieve in a better way, focusing on the person as a result of some of the changes that we're making around our own front door, because what we want to do with those conversations is bring others into those conversations. But it would be wrong of me to stray any further, because again, that's a practitioner question, that's a social worker question, but we can certainly find out more from our practitioner colleagues. Is there anything you wanted to add? Sorry.
Okay, I've got two people left on my list, Chris and Peter. My apologies, I should have introduced Kelly McKenzie, our Democratic Services Officer, and Charlotte Hudson, Head of Housing and Communities, earlier. And the reason I'm doing it now is that if either of you two have got any comments or questions, this is a team, so please feel free after the two I've got. If you want to ask a question, either of you feel free. Okay? No, is it? I can't think of everything, nor can you. That's why we're a team. So I've got Chris, and then I've got Peter. Thanks.
Hello, thank you. I absolutely welcome your vision of working and moving forward with the NHS and the integrated services. I'm a big fan of health and social care working together. Unfortunately, my experiences over the last 2 or 3 years have been that whilst KCC, the social work side, have done a really good job and work really hard, it seems like they have to battle all the time against health for a lot of things, along with the discharges. I've got lots of experience of them not working. People not being assessed before they're discharged causes major problems. I've had 2 experiences in the last 18 months where the hospital have done their assessment, they've done their discharge, and then the Kent Enablement team have gone in and on 2 occasions have said these people shouldn't have been discharged. They've been discharged too early. We haven't got the time to put the resources in that they need, and they've gone back to hospital as failed discharges, and that should not happen. And also the Kent Enablement team, when they do their assessments for putting in things that people need on their discharge from hospital, I have there's actually a family member who is only in his 40s, lost a leg through sepsis, and the Kent Enablement team said he needs to have a shower put in, but the waiting list to have the shower put in was 2 years. So, which is ridiculous, you know. And it just seems that people don't communicate properly. And also, the people you commission to go in and do the home care services, I've seen big failures on that, because it seems to be the in thing now that when a home care service takes on a client, they don't actually go out and visit them and do their own assessment first. And I've seen 2 failed care packages because the provider didn't go and do their own assessment, and it turned out that they couldn't meet the needs of the person that they were supposed to be visiting. And it's all these little things of everybody working together and communicating together to get it right. And there's too many little bits that are going wrong. Thank you.
So, obviously it's still early days in terms of the new pathway that we've put in place. But the hope is obviously that is enabling the hospital, the enablement team and others to communicate more effectively, because it's a single route rather than different routes out and different ways that people were going before. Can't promise that it's going to be perfect straight away, but we'll hopefully, as that beds in, we'll hopefully see improvements. Completely hear what you're saying around the communication between teams, and I mean, I know one of the developments. Again, I can't talk about sort of the discharge hub that's in Medway, but I know sort of in other hospitals the developments of those discharge hubs or rapid transfer hubs, there's lots of different names for them, is bringing multiple disciplinary teams together in order to support and make sure that the discharge is the right thing. So again, that's where the opportunities and where things are changing and hopefully will improve. I think in terms of the route now through the enablement pathway is allowing that person to get home, to allow that assessment to then happen in the home environment rather than in a hospital environment. Because assessing somebody when they're lying in a bed or they're in a hospital environment is not necessarily looking, as Mel said, at what their strengths are, what they can do, and what support they really need around them. So again, it's building that time in terms of allowing people to settle back into their own home, get back into sort of their routines and see what support is required around them. And that would be then working with, if there's a further package required at the end of that, working with that provider to ensure that the right provider, the right support is going in. So completely hear what you're saying in terms of how things haven't necessarily worked in the past. What we're hoping is that what we're doing and what we're doing now will improve that and be better for people in the future.
Thank you. I mean, the only concern I have there is doing the assessment in the home environment is all well and good until that person's discharged and goes home, and then the enablement team come in and say, oh, you can't do the stairs. Oh, you haven't got a bed downstairs. And then they're stuck.
So, I would hope, obviously, that part of that discharge hub at the point in the hospital is looking at those sort of things prior to somebody going home, and that those sort of discussions and those communications and things are happening at that point. I suppose what I'm saying here is that with the enablement package and supporting somebody at home is about ensuring that the assessment when they're in their own home is around any ongoing support at that point. In terms of the assessment at the point where they're in hospital, that's where the hubs and the various teams and individuals and professionals need to be working together to make sure that it's an appropriate discharge.
Thanks, Chris. Peter.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'll just make a few comments, if you don't mind. What you mentioned about you can let people to make their own minds up where they want to be, it all sounds good, and that you're moving to, they want to choose where they want to live in the bits and pieces, so it sounds really very good. And then you mentioned about you're trying to get the buildings to be altered to do it. Of course, this was because we've got a stays put scheme that operates here, and they do marvellous work in putting in lifts, wide paths, parking bays with ramps. It costs a lot of money each time. They can only work through KCC contractors. They're not allowed to operate without them. You know, they can't go into the private cheaper run. So we've already got things sort of all trying to, like you said, all trying to work the same way, which I think is good. The one fear I've got where you mentioned that you let people have the power over their own money to employ people where they were coming, if they're using the neighbour, and I don't mean to use it out of context, please don't take it, but that's fraught with people being able to be swindled a little bit, and I'll use the word off the cuff, you know, because that's the stories we hear so many times where the helpful person who gets a bit of money for doing this looks after, they're not going to want them to go back into urgent care, they're just going to try and keep them exactly as it is, even if they don't want to be there. So I think there's fraught dangers are there, and it would have to have some sort of safeguarding control on top of your normal management system that could actually override that and check that out. You know, that's I want you to be aware of that. I'd like to think about the old people's places, and Peter McDonald's points. I come from Rushington, only a small estate down there. Our old people's bungalows, there were 24 of them. 8 of them have been sold off to young couples because they're going into private hands, because they have the right to buy. Even the retired people could actually buy them, and then the families get them that way and then sell them on. So you're losing an area that was, it's slowly gone. A third of it is now privately owned when it was designed to be old people and old people together, you know, and things like that. And also the worst, one of the things that brought me onto this concept being a councillor was the old people's home at Rushington Road. It was 140 residents, lovely people. It was a lovely procession every Monday when they went down to play bingo in the clubhouse down there, you know. Everyone loved them, you know. But it was closed down because they had to have a shared bathroom. That was when they changed a lot of them. So you had like 2 rooms or 4 rooms sharing the same bathroom, which is now suddenly illegal, can't do it anymore. They didn't convert it for less people, they just moved the whole lot out. All 140 were moved out of Queenborough, away from, and not even on the island. They were moved off the island, and all their relatives are still in Queenborough. So you had old people scattered around. So, and to get a better facility, which hopefully, what you're saying about houses being built towards outlet, I can see the good point of that. But of course, that was one of the worst things. There's not been enough making facility for old people to live at this stage, and that's one major battle we've been up against the council for a long time. And you're adding things too here which are nice luxury issues. If you don't mind, don't take me word in directly, but where people are going to live is a major problem, and that will only exacerbate. And there's every possibility that helping them at home and bits and pieces could lead to some shortcomings and the wrong treatment of the people. And I only wanted to make that point. Myself, I know what it's like to have to get out of hospital. And recently, as everyone knows, I've been quite ill. I should have declared interest, yeah. I had a fall and cracked my kneecap open, dislodged it. And it was giving me so much stick, I decided to go to the hospital. Then they find out you've got a lymph node problem, or you've got no oxygen. that's no, but the getting out, I couldn't pass the. I'd been there 18 days I was in there. I still couldn't pass the stair test to be allowed to go home unless I converted the house. The family, no chance. He's not having that. You're not converting the back room. You're not converting and a downstairs and a commode. But, I'm fortunate enough. I arranged Standard to put me a stair lift in from a hospital bed, you know, which I had that advantage. And they did that in 4 days. I've had people around that you were speaking of that come and they put in nice little handrails supplied by the state, you know, for me to get up and down. So I've still got to look out the door, got a set of stairs to get to the road, you know. So I've now got my own little handrail which the government supplied, so I'm thankful for that. But it was only those points I wanted to bring that it brings out lots more issues alongside what you're doing. And you sound really good, but there are issues to watch out for. That's my point. Thank you.
Thank you for those points. You're absolutely right. There are safeguards for us to consider when we talk about direct payments, when we give people those direct payments and encourage them to spend the money on this kind of support that they want. So those safeguards are undertaken by our practitioner teams, and you know it's true to say that Kent is an outlier in terms of the very small number of people that we have that are doing this compared to other local authorities, and other local authorities are doing this quite successfully, putting in absolutely, as you say, all of those correct safeguards to make sure that people can spend their money on the things that will make the biggest difference to them. I'm sure Charlotte wouldn't forgive me for commenting on Right to Buy. Definitely straying outside my territory there, so I'll refrain from any comments on that any further. But what I will say is that we are as we've, Simon showed you in the accommodation strategy, we are really keen to consider a range of accommodation with support options for older people, and we're pursuing those conversations. And that might look like lots of different things. You know, it might look like a care home with, nursing and, support for complex needs. It might look like more extra care housing that we know is that there's a very small number of units for extra care housing in your borough. We're really keen to work with you closely on that. And I know our Director of Commissioning has been, having conversations about that. So I think for us, it's about that balance of options for people so they can choose the right thing for them, recognising not everything will suit everybody.
Sorry, and I'll put context behind this one. So I do have a resident who was discharged from hospital into a property that is not suitable. It cannot be adapted. There is no method of adapting it. They are now confined to a single room in that particular property. They cannot move around it. They cannot get through the doors in the wheelchair that's provided following their stroke. Back in the day, they would have been discharged to Kiln Court as a temporary measure until alternative accommodation could be found that was suitable on either mutual exchange, management move, or through the housing list. At this point in time, there is nothing like that. Is there plans to commission a service like that again so that there is somewhere to go? Because at the moment, realistically, needs a wheelchair adapted property, one bed or 2 bed in the Faversham area. He's probably going to be waiting 3.5 to 4 years, give or take, at the very least, assuming that the developers build out at the rate that they say they're going to build out at. That's 3 or 4 years of somebody who's had a rather massive stroke at a relatively young age, who cannot leave the house, cannot move out of one single room. They're not going to have any quality of life at all, and it's the quality of life for his other half as well. We need to get the whole route right. And the reliance at the moment is that particular housing association should find them a management move. Well, they don't have that stock, and they're one of the ones that's not expanding in the area at the minute. So it's going to be a struggle. So yeah, are there any plans to recommission a service similar to the likes of Kiln Court that used to provide relief care days and that opportunity for somewhere to discharge a patient who doesn't need to be in hospital but can't go home?
We're looking at each other blankly because neither of us have any knowledge of Kiln Court, so perhaps we can have a conversation about what that looks like. Okay. Yeah, we'll happily have a look at that. Thank you.
And to be fair, that was one of the uses of Blackburn Lodge, respite care as well. It wasn't just you there, but people could go in so that, like the carers, the family could get some sort of break. Now, Kelly and Charlotte, have you got any questions? Okay, so I've got a question. When you spoke very, very early on about forward planning, I don't want you to think I'm one of these funny people, but I damaged my back in my early 30s. I just got into gardening. So what I did was, over the years, I built loads of raised beds because I never wanted to get to the stage where I couldn't do that bit of gardening. Dad also used to come down the house, and up until it was less than 2 months before he died, he was sat on his little stool by my raised bed digging up carrots. And that kept his quality of life. But what actually helped was, because I've got an upstairs toilet, and I didn't have and somebody said, why don't you talk to Stay Put, because Dad was on sort of a list of conditions. And they said, yes, he qualified, and they came, because that kept him going. That was his getting out, and they put a handrail in my house so that he could access the toilet, so he could continue, say, right up to a couple of months before he died, to come down and have that quality of life. But it wasn't until you just said, doing that right across the piece just actually seems a bit of a no-brainer. It's like succession planning, isn't it? But what we might apply to our place of work, who's going to be the counsellor after I step down, who's going to have my job when I retire, we don't seem to do that in terms of older people, in their life. So, okay, that you like doing that, how can we make sure you can do it almost till the day you die? Whether it's digging up carrots, they were in a raised bed, so they didn't need a fork. But that sort of thing, and that philosophy, I think that is really fantastic. And I think if we can spread it about, even if only 20-30% of people use it, it will actually improve the quality of life of not only that 20-30%, but also their families and friends. And it gradually, those waves go out and go out and go out. So I am very enthused by what you've been saying. My one question was also on the direct payments, because I know somebody who had this. Well, we're going to put this money in this account for you, and you can pay for cleaning. Okay, well, perhaps some people think too much, but okay, so I'm going to give the neighbour some money to do my bit of cleaning. Does the neighbour need to contact the HMRC and tell them? Does the neighbour need to contact the DWP and tell them? What do they do about tax returns? It sounds great, but in this country of ours, the honest people worry about doing things and making sure everything's recorded correctly. I know there's a small percentage who take everything and they can get in Scarpa, but I know a number of people, older people, very older people, who were offered this sort of stuff, who just couldn't get their head around. You can give your neighbour a tenner to come in and do a bit of cleaning, or go and get a bit of shopping, or or like an audit trail. And I think if there is something that you can do to make it in words of one syllable, it is this simple. I think it would encourage take up, especially when the older people. I'm not an older person, but I am a dinosaur. I haven't got one of these. I use cash, as a lot of people use cash. So, you know, there is a barrier there, and anything that you can do to help make it simple, and you're not doing anything wrong, blah blah blah, I think would increase the take up. Thank you.
So 2 points I'd make there. You talked about us kind of having these conversations with people earlier and thinking in advance about what older age might look like for them. So we, as an authority, have committed to, we've recruited some engagement and involvement officers, and that's exactly the work that they're doing. They're going out into communities, and they've helped us to develop the strategy, but they've also helped us to develop the refresh, so that we've got a really good understanding. But we're stimulating those conversations in communities about what do you think you're going to want, because the things that I want or I'm expecting to have when I'm older are not the things that my mum wants, and certainly not the things that my daughter wants at 20. So it helps us to keep that conversation evolving, and those involvement officers and the information that they're giving us has been really key to helping us develop the documents that we've shown you tonight. And secondly, on direct payments, some people have very small direct payments, other people have quite substantial direct payments according to the needs that they've presented with. And some of those packages that they want to develop can be really complex, and they require, for example, the employment of a personal assistant. So we have a service now that can guide people through all of those things. And one of the advantages of using the community catalysts is that at the smaller end, they are putting those people who want to be micro providers through an accreditation process. They're giving them updates about what the tax situation is, and they're advertising those businesses. So the businesses themselves are quite motivated to keep in touch with us because we're helping to promote their business. But we do that on the understanding that we've undertaken an accreditation process and that they are fit and proper people, and they're conducting their business correctly, however small that might be. So I hope that gives you a bit of reassurance.
Okay, so anybody else want to know? Thank you both very much for coming along. I found it interesting. The number of people who asked questions, I think you all found it interesting as well. And please, we welcome you back. Now, you're welcome to stay, but if you've got to get home and get your tea, I don't have a problem.
That would be good. Yeah.
Thank you. Right, Charlotte's going to go and escort our visitors out, so we'll have a 5-minute break. All right, 10. Don't forget I'm slow. Okay, members, we're going to restart the meeting. Thank you for that. I thought that was really, really informative. Charlotte, can we put on the forward plan for them to come back when they need to come and ask us about the next steps?
Certainly, Chair, I'll add that.
Okay, thanks. Now, item 6, temporary accommodation scrutiny report to follow. This is the one that was laid on the table. We don't normally accept late reports, but as we do know, our staff down there are not twiddling their thumbs. They're working their little cotton socks off. And there was an issue with the... Ange says you press a button and the stuff comes out. It's not that easy, I know. So there was a little few blips on that. So Charlotte is going to go through the report. It's simply an update, as we agreed we were going to have, to make sure that we are closely monitoring that £480,000, I think it was, that we agreed to put from the TA into the staffing to see if we can really make a difference in slowing down the TA and keeping people in their own homes. So over to you, Charlotte. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, and also apologies for the late issuing of this report. If I take it as it was a tabled report, if I take you through the report step by step, and feel free to ask any questions. One thing I would like to say is I want to create a template as a basis to update you with at every meeting. So I'd also like to seek feedback in terms of what information you find valuable, and other things that we could add in to make it easier for you to scrutinise this spend as we go forward. And we may add things in, and then you might say, actually, there's no, and we can take things out afterwards as well. So I quite like it to be a bit of a dynamic report for the first few, and then once we can get into a stabilised report structure, that'll be a lot easier to create it. So this report really is here to provide you with an update on our temporary accommodation position, and that includes the the financial and the performance elements of that. And as the Chair has already said, we are looking at making significant investments, and this committee has made those decisions to make significant investments into this service through additional staffing, but also the purchase of the temporary accommodation managed wholly and owned by the council. So to start with, I thought I'd provide you with information really on the number of households that are in temporary accommodation, as that's probably the primary indicator of the level of risk that we're doing and whether we've got more demand coming into the council in terms of the temporary accommodation. So the way that we have to report to MHCLG on a quarterly basis, and we have to do something called a H-click return, it's the figure that we do is the number of households in temporary accommodation on the last day of the quarter. We also, for our own benefit, do record last days of the month, and we can interrogate data for any period in the month, but that is the typical indicator. So the report here on table 2.4 or point 2.4 is providing the numbers at the last point of the period. So for the annual figures, it's the last on how many households we had in temporary accommodation on the 31st of March. And then I provided you with the quarterly elements. So we were at 337 in 22-23. We came down to 305 in 23-24, and then end of quarter one we were at 281, and at end of quarter two we were at 285. Clearly, that figure fluctuates on a daily basis. So even I look at it daily, and we have a dashboard that we can access on our database, and it can move up considerably over a course of a week, and down again as people are moved through the their cases move through the system. So that kind of gives us a bit of an indicator of where we're at. I've also provided a breakdown in terms of where we are placing them, and that indicates to that same marker as in the end of the period about what stock we are using to accommodate them, and whether that's our own stock, the homeless hostel, housing association properties, where we have an agreement with Southern Housing, and nightly let accommodation, which also includes bed and breakfast. We incorporate all of that together, although we don't use a lot of bed and breakfast, but we will for emergency placements. And then I've also included those that are funded outside of our statutory duty through the RSI funded, so that's not part of the statutory responsibilities. As you can see, the numbers predominantly are the nightly let accommodation at the moment, and they are absolutely our most expensive accommodation, which is where this strategy is looking to reduce that and reduce our overall costs. So that is the one indicator. I'd love it to be zero. I think the reality of it ever being zero is probably minimal, but minimising that is really a measure of success, and how we move that forward. So that number, again, will fluctuate, and as you can see, it has gone up from Q1 to Q2. I think, as I've put later on in the report, one of the significant increases we've had in Q2 was the fire up in Faversham, and that saw quite a large number of people, of households, come into temporary accommodation overnight. The majority, I think we're at well over half, have actually been moved on to permanent accommodation now. A lot of those individuals are economically active and have jobs that they can rely on. They are much easier to move through because of references and their affordability and things like that. But again, we have seen an increase this quarter. We also do see a bit of a seasonal increase towards the end of the summer. September's always a busy month. October also feels like a busy month as well. So we will see seasonal fluctuations over the period, over the year as well. But that is sort of the current position on temporary accommodation. The next table I provided was really about the implementation of our temporary accommodation purchase programme. And before the programme was initiated, we had 3 properties already owned and have done for quite a while. And as you can see, the properties that we're up to 24 properties now, we've completed on a few more. So that was up until the end of September. And the current permission I have from the committee is to increase from the 3, add another 50 on. So we should see that going up to a maximum of 53, as long as the budget allows that to happen. So obviously there was the budgetary figure and the number of properties. So again, that's an indicator of progress on that initiative. One of the other indicators, it's just kind of more of a metric of how the team's functioning, but also the move on availability in terms of social housing, is the number of households on the housing register. So as you're all very familiar with the housing allocations policy because you approved it, and I know you all get awful lot of casework on housing register cases. We have seen quite an increase in the number of people applying to the housing register, but also meeting the eligibility criteria of the housing register now, and that has increased. I also wanted to provide you with the number of lets that we've had through the housing register annually. So that's with new stock coming on board through Section 106 agreements, where we have the nomination rights for, which on all Section 106 agreements, we have the nomination rights. If there's additional affordable housing provided through planning schemes, we might not have a whole of nomination rights. A lot of them we absolutely do. And just to see the number of lets that we've had per quarter as well. So in Q1 this year, we had 133 lets through the housing register. Q2, we had 89. That is a provisional figure because sometimes some of the data returns are delayed, so that may go up. So when you see this report again, it could be 92, but that's from what we know currently. So there's a huge gap in terms of the number of people on the housing register and that new supply coming through either relets or new properties. And the other table that I've also provided here is affordable homes delivered in the borough. Back in 22-23, we had 208 affordable homes, and that could be from social rent, affordable rent, shared ownership, and first homes. We've had a few of those last year. We We had 289 last financial year. We've had 57 in quarter 1 and 38 in quarter 2. Sometimes we do get a slight variation if there's been a late return or someone hasn't informed us of those completions. Those figures may change, but that's just showing the number of affordable homes that we are getting as new stock and provided in our borough. So that probably gives the sort of data side of the temporary accommodation situation at the moment. I think we know that it's fluctuating. Say we can't predict incidents like the fire that we had and sort of the demand, but quite rightly we do have a statutory responsibility to do that and have fulfilled that statutory responsibility. We have the temporary accommodation purchase programme is working really well, and we have a really steady flow, and we are in legals with I think we're about 1 or 2 shy of the meeting our current limit in terms of that decision. I haven't included in the report currently because we aren't at a complete level, but once we are fully occupied, looking at the void level, because we did build into the model a percentage of void periods, because there will be we will have days of void periods between placements. Currently, though, I just wanted to flag that we do have one property that we have completed on, and unfortunately, before we even managed to get our first household in there, or maybe fortunate because they might have been impacted by the incident, there was a fire at the neighbouring property that was an empty property, and that has caused damage to our property, and we are currently completing the insurance works on that, which is in progress. And say the insurance team within the finance department that we share with Thanet on that occasion have worked really hard to work with the insurance companies to get that in and prioritise that work. But as far as I'm aware, I still don't think we've got someone in there. The works are just about being completed. So again, with a nightly let provider, that would be the provider's responsibility, but we take that liability on by having it as our property. So, do you want me to pause on the performance stuff before I mention the budget, or do you want me to carry on?
I think so, because I've got 3 names down. Thanks, Charlotte. I've got Tony, Tom, and then Alistair.
Thank you, Chair. I'll probably put a pedantic question, but I see on 2.4, column 4, the Affordable Housing, not Affordable Housing Association. You said it was Southern Housing statistics. We also have moat housing. I know I have moat housing in my ward. Does it include both housing associations?
In terms of the affordable homes delivered,
yes.
That's all registered providers that provided affordable housing, new affordable housing in the borough.
Yeah, that is a total. Okay, just thanks for clarifying. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I didn't really have much to say, only that I think it's important that we all realise that, as it does say in the report, demand for homelessness services across the country is still high, and that is anticipated to continue. I just think that, as well as with the recommendations on the report, I think we should add a section on to note the good work that the housing team at Swale are doing. I think that the reason that some of it's dropping off, and I don't think it's so much that there isn't a need for temporary accommodation and there aren't homeless people in Swale. I think that yourself and your team are extremely good at managing that and dealing with it as it comes up. It's perhaps a little too early to scrutinise the full impact of the money that we agreed to move at the last meeting, because that was only a couple of months ago, and so perhaps at the next one we'll be able to get a better picture. But I just wanted to say thank you for all the work that you've done and all the work your team have done to manage the homelessness issue.
Thank you very much, Tom. And when we get to the end of the report, I hope that you'll make that as a second recommend. Okay, seconded. Ben, do we want to vote on that? Well done. And thank you. But that's because we're all working. We all know this. I don't think there's one of you who's ever turned up here and hadn't read your papers, because you're interested in the committee. Alistair, you're next.
Just two questions. One is, you said the numbers on the housing register was rising. Do you have a feel for why that's happening?
I think there's two reasons. I think one, people are struggling to access the private rented sector and are looking, people that might not have considered social housing and then understand that they do meet the criteria. So I think the access to the private rented sector is an incredibly high reason for that. I also think that, I just think it's financially very challenging for people at the moment, and the cost of living crisis has also added to that. So I think it's about having a wider sense of that tenure that's available, but also the financial pressures that a lot of households are finding themselves on. We also seem to be getting a lot more medical reasons for why people want to maybe look at their banding more than just necessarily access. That seems to be coming quite strongly through, and everybody obviously wants to advocate for themselves and feel that their case is the most important, but everybody on that housing register, particularly in the bands A and B, have incredibly high needs now, and we have lost quite a lot of that sort of supported accommodation that may have surfaced outside of more general needs accommodation. So I don't know whether we're picking up an element of wider provision as well.
Thank you. My other question was, it's very encouraging to see the speed with which you've been able to acquire properties. Do you have a feel of how much money that's saving, sort of over the, or will that be something that you'll be reporting on later in the year, and how that cost compares with the cost of it? You know, is this? Will you be able to demonstrate the benefit in purely monetary terms going forward? Because I think that would be really useful to know that, because I think it, would very much help make the case for Invest to Save.
Yes, certainly, and that is absolutely the intention to bring that forward. So the model that we did in order to make the decision has worked out the value, sort of how much we could spend on a property, but based upon the bedroom size, knowing what rents we could charge, and so we're going to get that onto the next paper as well. But the holding, how long properties are void for, whether they need a lot of works, and the maintenance side of it, there's some unknown variables. So we've made good assumptions based upon other local authority colleagues' experience. So we are hoping that absolutely it will save us money, and we'll demonstrate that. So our pre-work has demonstrated it, but we need to obviously realise that, and that is part of what needs to come forward, and is also part of the reason why you haven't got more detailed finances on here, because that's the piece of work that we're trying to establish, so we can really strongly indicate that this was a cheaper placement than if we had put them with one of our nightly let providers, and look at those differences. And that's the sort of the next bit I absolutely want to make sure is in the report, to demonstrate that, or if it's not working, that we make a decision about that as well, so it's really clear. Or it might be a certain property that doesn't work because it's got a high maintenance liability, and then we would need to sort of dispose of that and maybe invest that money elsewhere.
And Tim.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I just kind of want to echo what Councillor Nundy said about the good work that the team have done. I would say it's excellent work, outstanding. Exemplary stuff that they're doing for us, and without that we really would be struggling, and people out there would be suffering far more than they are. Councillor Gold stole my thunder a little bit with the increases and the rationale and reasons for that, but naturally I would say, wouldn't I, the impact of fire and other emergencies can have just overnight, so we're suddenly starting to have to scratch about for not too far shy of 20 places for people to stay. And on that issue, I was really disappointed initially that I only got to know about this later the following afternoon, not at the time of the fire. So when I asked the question in my inimitable way and was told that, well, actually, we've only just been informed about it. So the chair and myself raised it at a meeting recently with senior fire officers and senior police officers to say that actually there's protocols out there that are in place. And, you know, whilst it wasn't a criticism, a mistake was made quite clearly, but it would have just helped us to get our heads up a little bit quicker on that one. And then I just wanted to say about the Johnson House and Bridge House in terms of the numbers. We've got an idea of what sort of numbers they're likely to provide for us.
Not off the top of my head that would be
Okay, no,
accurate,
that's fine.
although I do have the SLA to sign.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
I can certainly provide that information for you.
Lovely, thank you.
But yeah, we're hoping, I say, the final agreement has come over to me yesterday, so we're just getting that signed, so that is imminently going to happen.
Lovely, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thanks. So if we move on to the next Ben, and then we'll move on to the next section.
Sorry. As ever, you're trying to play your figures down. Always trying to make out that you haven't done as well as you have. If we would convert these figures into percentages, that really shows the story. 0.8% of our stock in 22-23 was being dealt with through our own stuff. Those three people. The only area which has really gone down in terms of where people are staying at the moment is the housing association. They've dropped down 5% in that quarter. That's quite a chunk. And in actual fact, with the increases that you've had on the SBC owned stock, you can see straight away you've probably saved somewhere around 6-7% going into nightly let. So let's not forget that. Let's not underplay it. You almost want to put the percentages on every report just so that it shows how good you actually are doing as a team. Because I think it could be really easy for someone to go, well, we're using more nightly let. That's unacceptable. But I think we're a reasonable committee that looks into the figures and appreciates that the work's being done. In terms of the other driver for increased applicants for the housing register, I'm really sorry. I had a conversation with Citizens Advice about making sure that they know how to help people apply for the housing register and checking them first, which is also probably why they're coming in and they actually meet it first time rather than appealing and reapplying. Sorry.
So just obviously the housing association numbers have gone down, which is actually currently below our SLA that we have with them for that provision. So that is something we're currently addressing with them. The reason that has dropped is because we have converted some people who've been in their property as temporary accommodation for a long time, and we've converted those to permanent tenancies. So they need other stock to come available, which might have void works and other things coming in place. But we do have a number of properties ready to come on stream to meet our service level requirements. And Councillor Watson was at a meeting with me last week with the Chief Executive of Southern, and we did raise that point there. Just to, again, reiterate that we do need to we know that the local team are working on it, but it was an opportunity to obviously raise that and make sure that we had that commitment as well.
My apologies, Peter. You're next.
Yeah, thanks,
And
Chair.
then Karen.
The only thing I've got is, and I don't want to be a doom monger, I think, you're doing an excellent job, but the serious problem that I think we're going to have is when the so-called holiday camps, which are all being occupied, or most of them are being occupied by people for the whole, or for most of the year, the 2 months from January and February, I think that could be a pretty desperate situation. And frankly, that's really the enforcement ought to be taken onto the holiday. I don't suggest that they should be made into 12-month occupancy, which I think would be wrong. But you know, you can see that for 2 months there will be people who will be homeless.
Absolutely. We experience that every year. So in a way, some of that is already embedded in those seasonal trends that we've had from previous years, because we do get it every year. We are already getting phone calls from people concerned about their housing situation, whether that's from November for the ones that close for 4 months, and we know that we get a flurry in January. The team are absolutely looking to work with people at an early stage to see what else can be done. But it is a problem for us. It continues to be a problem for us. We don't have an easy solution to it. If those individuals if we have a legal responsibility to those individuals. So we have to work with the cases that are presented to us. But I say we are trying to do some upfront work with them. We know we monitor everybody that makes an inquiry, looking for trends around those. Typically, the last couple of years, they're not the same people that come back every year. They are different people, and some of these people have, I suppose, eased their own housing situation by going to stay somewhere for the summer. So they would have come to us anyway, and sometimes they're just coming to us a little bit later. But others are using that as a base. They're staying in a friend's caravan, or that they are using that. So it is a problem that we still need to have a solution for, which is very tricky. But we will probably see the January quarter have a bit of an uplift related to caravan parks.
Thank you, Peter. Karen.
Thank you, Chairman. So I will be very brief. As Charlotte has already said, I was in a meeting with her last week with Southern Housing. Voids does seem to be a bit of an issue. We've been told that the target is 20 to 25 days turnaround, and at the moment they're just about achieving 40. So obviously, clearly, that is not just a little issue, it's quite a big issue. We were told that the majority of voids are due to their tenants passing away. So then you have to wait for the families, if they have them, to deal with the properties. So that does put a bit of a delay on things. I was in a meeting with Southern Housing last week as well. I had 2 meetings with them. I think they were sick to death of seeing me last week. And we were told in the whole of Kent there were 76 voids, and 68 of them were in Swale. So clearly, definitely an issue. But we'll have to just all keep banging on at them. So I get the feeling if we don't tell them that we're seeing stuff when we're out there in our wards, they don't tend to know, which is very much a concern. But again, I reiterate everything that's been said by Tom and by Tim and everybody else to say that the amazing job your team does, Charlotte, they're fantastic. And our residents are probably very thankful for it as well, but we certainly are. So let's just go from strength to strength. So thank you.
Thank you, Karen. And Tony's just put his hand up.
Thank you for letting me come back on a point. As we know, the housing associations invariably, when tenants die or whatever, they sell their properties on. I've had numerous situations in my ward, particularly in Milton. I think that's just been touched on. The housing stock is drastically going down. But the point I'm making is, are they building enough new properties, as they tell me, or the Southern area manager does, when I contact him, to replace the stock that is being sold off? Have you got any answer to that? Possibly not.
I wouldn't like to speak on behalf of another organisation, and we do have Southern Housing coming to our March meeting, so you can make a note of that. All I would say is, obviously, there is housing associations have to reinvest any from the sales goes back into their existing stock, and whether that's providing new stock. If they do right to buy, they have to re-provide, but not necessarily with disposals. I think the biggest issue is the condition of the properties, as you've mentioned, and it's not economical for them to bring back into use, and the issue of the requirements for the sort of the decent home standard that they need to provide, and the EPC ratings and various other things. So it is very challenging for them. We do know that Southern have quite publicly said, I mean, it's been even in, I think it was in the Observer a couple of weeks ago from Paul Hackett himself, saying that they aren't developing, they are not building any new properties up until 2028 because they have to invest their resources into improving the condition of their existing stock. And again, having that conversation directly with them, it's very much a viability issue for them to provide homes in London and the South East, but they've also got a capacity issue both in their own in-house teams in terms of development, but also within the construction sector within London and the South East to, even if the grant per property was raised, we don't have enough professionals and the construction industry to bring forward those affordable homes. That's what they're telling us. As I say, they are coming to this committee in March, so there's lots of opportunities to ask them further queries on those matters as well.
Thank you for that answer.
Okay, so before we move on to the next section, as Charlotte has raised it, because I was going to raise it at the end, there are a number of substitutes here this evening. I am very open to things which affect our residents. So if you want to come along to the March meeting, because Southern's coming along and you've got a list as long as your arm of questions, then I'm quite happy that we sit here and ask all the questions until everybody's had everything answered. So that is an offer. I might not be here to chair it, but I'm sure the person who is will be here till midnight. Anyway, people, do you want to move on to the next bit, Charlotte?
Yeah, so the next section, I've just realised my page numbering and paragraph numbering's gone wrong. So I have provided how much we spent on nightly let provision compared to the previous year, but as I've mentioned earlier, at the moment we're trying to align all the budgets in terms of the financial staffing changes, the temporary accommodation purchase, to make sure that we are making savings, and then what we pay out to external providers. Once I have all of that information, which I should have within the sort of the next week or 2 weeks, I won't wait till the next committee. I will share the Q2 results with the committee, so you have that overview, and that would also give us a really good baseline as we have worked through to implement all these interventions to make sure that they are working or not. That was what I was really keen to do, was to try and find that we had that proper baseline to benchmark against and scrutinise against in the future. So apologies that wasn't available in this report. I will endeavour to get that to you until we've got that baseline position. So the final element was really sort of the current risks and issues that I haven't put every risk and issue on here. These are sort of more the current ones really. As we've already mentioned tonight, demand for homelessness services across the country is still high and is anticipated to continue. There doesn't seem to be a let up, and lots of councils and the district council network is still doing quite a lot of lobbying in terms of those issues and the amount of impact that's having, particularly on district councils. There was some interesting reports that have recently come out that are showing that mortgage repossession are, so far we've had 1 or 2 cases of mortgage repossessions come through. It's very rare that we get a mortgage repossession case. It was probably a decade before that we had our last one. Again, people have equity in their properties. They maybe take that as an opportunity to move into the private rented sector. But as we know, that sometimes is more expensive than being in a situation where you're paying a mortgage. About 1% of people within the South East that have a mortgage are at least two payments behind currently. The latest figures are showing. So even though we've had very small cases on that, I think that is still a risk to us, and it is something that we are monitoring as a team, just to see if we're getting a certain trend coming in and if there's intervention work that we can do at an earlier stage. Also mentioned is we are finalising the agreements for Old Johnson House and Bridge House, and that will provide us with a lot more additional placements through that agreement with Southern Housing. And I say that agreement will be signed this week, so we should be utilising that accommodation very shortly. One element I wanted to flag, and I've tried to word it carefully here. So currently we have rough sleeping initiative funding from MHCLG. The last allocation that we had was for a 3-year period. That ends in this March. Currently, and I'm hoping the autumn statement may provide some further detail on this, we have no indication of if that funding is going to be available and if it is at the same levels or a reduced level. Currently, we used some of our rough sleeper funding to bridge the gap when the Kent Homeless Connect service was decommissioned by Kent County Council. Therefore, that currently funds the 84-bed unit at the Quays. Without this additional funding, that scheme isn't viable and could be at risk. We are hoping, though, that some level of funding would come in, and we would definitely have to prioritise that as it. But I'm just highlighting that is a risk. It is a significant move on accommodation for us. It also houses a number of our rough sleepers. It's a really, really important scheme in the borough for a range of services. So I wouldn't like to say it's definitely closing. I wouldn't want to scaremonger or anything like that. I'm just saying there is a risk to the current funding source that needs to be addressed. And we are working with Riverside, who are the registered provider, to look at a range of options at the moment. But again, if that isn't there, that could have a knock-on effect to the service that we need to provide. I think I've already covered the delivery of affordable housing through the questions that we've just had. You know, it is an issue, despite planning committee securing a range of, we have a strong pipeline of affordable homes. The registered providers aren't prepared to purchase those properties because they don't meet the viability criteria for them. So they're secured in planning terms. They are not secured because we don't have a registered provider aligned to them. And as I've already mentioned, that we know registered providers have scaled back on their own delivery programmes, and the additionality that sometimes we get through either through recycle grant or their own investment, and there are issues with viability and capacity within the sector there. So that was sorry to end on the risks and issues session, which is very depressing. But I don't want to come here and say everything's great, because everything isn't great. We are working as hard as we can to control those figures. There are a huge amount of risks around that as well. And I want to be as open and transparent as I can be with this committee. Thank you. That's it, Chair.
So, on the planning front, because I'm sure we all read these bits in the paper. Number one, there's 3 affordable houses over there. Let's make up a housing association. Marchington Association, right? The Marchington Association said, well, if you'd have spoke to me at the beginning, maybe, but you've made it to the same standard as you're flogging them to these people in the, got the money to pay for them. And unfortunately, my standard as a housing association is much higher, so they're no good to me. That is one thing. So the point there is that if there is going to be affordable, social, whatever housing on a site, then it needs to be agreed with an RP, registered provider, before you start the build, love, not when you're finished. And I know this for a fact because I door knock as well as the rest of you, that the standard of some of the properties that you have used your life savings for a deposit really are appalling. But where you agree with a registered provider right before you start building, their surveyors are on the site watching every step of the way to make sure it's done properly and to the sizes and the spec. that they have for their standards, and that is the difference, which is why in the last 12 months we've had a number of newspapers asking for comments about all these affordable housings that are empty. That's because no housing association will take them on, because if there's 2 on that site and 3 over there, it isn't viable. And then the next point, of course, is the standard that you've built them to are lower than my standards. So, this is something that maybe the normal planning members, because I sub occasionally, normal planning members can actually take on board. I know, I'm just going to say this one thing, and I cannot for the life of me remember where it was in Sittingbourne, brand new house, cloakroom just inside the front door, and when you flush the toilet, it flushed upwards. And they know that it wasn't a snagging issue. Well, you've got a problem, you get onto a solicitor. And I just think those poor people have used their life savings for that deposit, and they are being ripped off. And it is so wrong that they can get away with such poor standards. And as I say, housing associations, there's always a blip, but by and large, housing associations have much higher standards, and they monitor everything that's done. So these are points that, are taken into consideration when RPs are saying, well, actually, we might as well, it's better to spend our money on sorting out the mould and damp than whatever. So that's my 2 penneth, and that's generated, I think, a couple of comments. Ben, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I'll just take an example from, I was at an end of defects period on a property 2 days ago. Quite entertaining, actually. You say about the difference in standard. One of those properties was late coming over and then being occupied because we had to ask the developer to come back and move the wall so that the hallway was the correct width for a social property. It needed to be another 2.5 inches width compared to what the private tenant gets. You look at the level of insulation. We go for a minimum of 270 mil, not a maximum. So they put more insulation in the social property than they do in the one they sell on. It's silly bits like that, and you just sit there and go, really? You didn't do it to the right standard. So it does show that they get to mark their own homework when it comes to their building regs. So they don't get exactly great stock.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that report, Charlotte. We do appreciate it, and hopefully the comments that everyone's made about your team will be passed back to them. We do appreciate what they're doing. Pardon? Oh, because we only voted on the extra one. So now we've got a substantive recommendation. Number 1, to scrutinise the performance report and controls in place to manage the TA budget. Kelly, have you got the second recommendation already written down, which we voted on? Good. That was thanks, staff. So all those in favour of recommendation 1 on the paper, thanks, please show. And that's unanimous. Thank you very much. So the next one is temporary accommodation policy. This was just a minor improvement, I think, wasn't it, Charlotte? Over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yes, it's a very minor amendment to the temporary accommodation policy. So we have an existing policy that was adopted by this committee back in March 2023. However, as we purchased our own stock, we have looked at there's slightly different rules around this. So we need to make sure that we're specifying the rent levels for the property which will enable us to claim the appropriate level of housing benefit, or charge the relevant tenant, if they're working and not able to claim benefit, the appropriate amount. So this is just aligning it to the current local housing allowance rates for the relevant area that the property is in. So that's the only amendment. We have done a little bit of redrafting to make it a little bit more user friendly, but that is the only substantive change to the actual content of the policy.
Okay, thanks, Tom.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not sure if this is actually relevant, but I thought I'd ask it because I realise that isn't actually about the change that's being put in. But obviously, I wasn't here in March 2023, so well, do what you got to do. Under the section of placements and prioritising households, there is some obviously really good stuff on there, and I take it that most of that will come from the law surrounding this, but I noticed that victims of domestic abuse aren't listed on that list of priorities, which I find to be slightly incongruent with previous support that the council has shown for victims of domestic abuse and supporting the various domestic abuse charities and services that Swale offers.
I will take that one away because it may be that because we have separate protocols for the domestic abuse clients, and where we place them is very much around safety planning rather than anything else. So the safety planning kind of precedes that. But how the policies talk to each other is really important, particularly if someone is thinking of fleeing and is doing their research, because we just want to make sure that the correct information is there. So I will take that away as an action to make sure that we look at that and make sure that we are referencing that appropriately. But say the safety planning is the main priority of how we place victims of domestic abuse.
Yep, thank you.
Chris. No.
Thank you. My question really is about some of the people that do the lists for prioritising, because in the last year I've had 2 residents contact me. Both were living in the borough for less than the 2-year required time limit, but both of them had very serious medical conditions backed up by health representatives and occupational therapists, people saying that the accommodation they had was not suitable to meet their needs. But both of them were refused to go on the list because of the timescale. Nobody looked at the bigger picture, which I think is important to realise that, when it's health grounds, the 2-year wait doesn't have to come into play, really. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I think that probably refers to the housing allocations policy rather than the temporary accommodation relocation element of this policy. That said, the housing allocations policy is, approved by this committee. The 2-year residency criteria is best practice in terms of that. Some do have it lower as an 18-month and various exceptions. So that's definitely something that when we do the housing allocations policy review, we can do. Equally, and this probably doesn't sound helpful, if they've been here 18 months, the likelihood of them getting a property in 6 months is quite limited, and then they could apply, but then their priority date would be lower down. So there would still be a further delay in them getting a social home. But it is just going back to the whole issue of that there isn't enough, and everybody in Band A and Band B principally has some level of quite significant medical needs. I see quite a lot of complaints, as I know all of you do, that come across our desks, and every one you read, you would go, if I had a house, I would give you one. But you read the next one and they've got something equally as difficult, probably a different condition or a different circumstance. And that is why the allocations policy is done based upon your banding criteria and your priority date from when you've joined the register. When we get to review that policy further, there may be other options that we can consider, and whether there's different priorities given. But I would say that's currently what we're adhering to, the current policy that is in place.
Thanks. And just for information, Chris, it used to be 5 years, and it still is 5 years in some places in the country. But that's the decision of the committee as and when it comes up. Ben, did you have your hand up?
I did. It's probably not one that's needed right now, but when we look on page 7 of the report, where has it gone? Get the right one open. The top one, we've got that table with the weekly TA charges for Sittingbourne and Sheppey and for Faversham. We do have some parts of the borough which we probably don't own stock in yet, but that sit into the Maidstone area. Is it worth us adding that in just in case we do get property in that area? Because I think that's a higher rate for most of the properties.
Absolutely can. I think the criteria that we've given in terms of the temporary accommodation purchase programme, though, has been in the main centres because of the access to transport and other links. Obviously, sometimes we place them not in their local town, so we need to make sure that they can reach education or employment as easily as possible. So yeah, I'm more than happy to add that, but don't expect us probably to buy any of those properties.
Okay, thanks, members. So, can we agree to adopt the revised TA temporary accommodation policy? All those in favour, please show. Okay, that's unanimous. Thank you very much. Then we move on to the ayes are going. And number 8, affordable housing emergency consideration of interventions, pages 15 to 18. Charlotte.
Yeah, thank you. So this is just an update for the committee. So as you were all aware, because you unanimously declared an affordable housing emergency at full council on the 3rd of April, and at the last Housing and Health Committee held back in August, an update was requested. So I've just sort of provided a table of the key components of the motion that was passed and an update of where we are in terms of those. Chair, I don't know if you want me to go through them one by one or just take questions.
I'm going to, oh dear. I'm going to presume, I'm trying to look and see if any of the fans are actually on, are they?
No.
Because we're all getting hot flushes here. I'm presuming you've all read it, so I'm going to take questions, and Ben's obviously the first. And we'll take it from there. Thanks.
Sorry, I'm going to be the painful one on this one. Right, so on the one regarding planning charges, which I know are set nationally, the idea was to look at whether there was any exemption that could be available. I'm just looking at our own fees and charges, which includes not-for-profit category, where we don't charge. So most housing associations are not for profit. So I'm just thinking, what's the definition? I think the exact definition in this is it has to be local, not for profit. Define local. So, there's some wiggle room there that we can probably get out of our planning colleagues to push a bit to try and get some sort of reduction. Not that the finance officer would like me at all. For saying that whatsoever. Sorry, leader. P&R. In terms of something else that came to mind, and it came to mind actually because of what our colleagues were talking about selling properties in Queenborough. Queenborough is one of the few parishes in the borough which has a rural exemption designation. So you're not supposed to do right to buy. You also got that in Tunstall and Tenham, but not Linstead. So south of the A2, sorry, they can do right to buy, but north they can't. It seems to me that realistically most of Sheppey should at the very least be an exemption area, given that we can't secure new stock currently on the island. So why would we permit the old stock to be sold off? Makes no sense. And perhaps some of our other rural areas would benefit from being included within the exclusion zone for right to buy going forward to protect our stocks. Certainly it works really well for parts of Maidstone such as Headcorn, Harrietsham, I want to say all of Aylesford, so all of Royal British Legion Village can never be sold off. So it does give that protection. It also works for shared ownership because they can only buy up to 80%. Or if they are allowed to buy 100%, they have to sell it back to the housing association. They can't sell it on as a normal property. So that may be worth some consideration as we look for. Beyond that, I think we've looked where we can look. As ever, great job. We'll see what else we can do and keep lobbying. Thanks very much I know Tim's been up there God knows how many times now to Westminster. Give another ear bashing for us and see where we get.
So just to go on to the fees and charges that you referenced are the sort of the pre-app planning figure, rather than the actual planning fee that's set nationally. So even a local charity would still need to have to pay that, but they can get the pre-app advice for free. I think when I did speak to sort of planning colleagues, the larger scale developments that RPs tend to do, the fees are quite small in comparison as part of a development fee. So it's whether would it incentivise rather than just reduce our fee. You know, if it was going to incentivise them to build more, then I think there'd be an argument there, and it just, I think, didn't come down that way in terms of that. In terms of obviously the rural designation for right to buy, didn't really form part of the motion, but quite happy to take that away and have a look and see if there's something that we can do, particularly, like I say, as you know, we get pretty much 0% affordable housing on the island. We do want to make sure that we secure and retain as much as possible, considering that is one of our areas with the highest need and preferences for affordable housing from the register as well. So yeah, we can certainly take that away and have a look.
So, any other questions on that report? No. So we've got. Are you all happy to note the current progress on the affordable housing emergency motion? Those in favour, please show. Thank you. That's unanimous. Well done. And then the last item, unless the eyes are going in. Right, then the last item is the forward decisions plan, and that's just the items that are coming up before the committee. And obviously we're adding on the bottom we're adding in somewhere the adult social care commissioning people at some point. January meeting, we've got Nikki Teasdale coming back from the Medway and Swale Health and Care Partnership to update us on all the stuff she's working on with her team and our community and voluntary sector. So that'd be a really good meeting. So that's just for noting, everyone. Good. Okay. So if there's nothing else, I'm going to declare the meeting closed. But thank you all for your attendance and your contributions. I think it's been a good meeting. Thank you very much. I'll make it 9:31 and 58 seconds. Thanks. Bye.